Good afternoon, everybody. This is Hunter Mozingo bringing you your daily market insight video for Monday, December 20th, 15 minutes after market close here in Jacksonville, Florida, 4:15 Eastern time to be exact. And today we had the indices gap down and act weak for the better part of the day, but we saw some of the risk on areas of the market show some strength. So we're going to look at those charts because it is an interesting phenomenon. We saw that a little bit towards the end of last week. We'll look at that too. But like I said, indices weak, some risk on areas showing some strength. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, let's talk about what just happened, right? We had a gap down, but the indices did finish well off the lows. Now, granted, none of them went green or anything like that, but we're off the lows by a decent bit, about 1 to 1.5% or more on most of the indices. So that is a positive given the action today that we just didn't flush and continue lower. We have changed the market state to consolidation. This is because we've got the Qs, the S&P, and the Dow now gapping down below those key moving averages, the 21 and the 50. We still have IWM struggling to find its footing. That is the small caps below all the major moving averages. And now we've got the mid caps also below the major moving averages, not to mention mid cap, small caps, and the Qs undercut their recent lows as well. So performance wise, G5 down about 1.5%, S&P down about 1.1%, Qs down about 1%, the Dow down about 1.2, mid caps down about 1.7, and the Russell down around 1.5. So no index was immune to the sell-off today. It was pretty brutal across the board. Even this morning, about 90 to 93% of the names I track, which is about a 1,400 stock list, were negative today. We're down. So that's a pretty bearish day across all sectors when you see that. And that is what we saw today. So we have some changes to the trend gauge. So we've got short term now moving to bearish with the gap down below the 21, consecutive closes below the 21 on the Qs, the S&P. Same thing with the Dow pretty much after today. And then medium term, as you can see, also going from up to neutral for the same reason, gap down below the 50 on the S&P, the Dow, and the Qs. If we get some more continuation or further closes below that 50-day moving average on those three, that'll probably go to bearish pretty quickly. And then long term, we still have that arrow pointing to neutral. That also could be subject to change pretty quickly as well with the way mid caps are acting below the 200. The Dow is right on the 200-day. So just some insight as to what's going on with the trend gauge there. Market leaders remains neutral, pointing towards bearish. We did see some constructive action from the leaders today. For example, like Apple kind of bouncing off the 21, Nvidia not continuing to go lower and trying to come back. So we saw some signs of life. So market leaders remains neutral for now. So before we get into the charts, this is Revere. As I always say, if you have any questions, please send me an email, hunter@revereasset.com. I'd be happy to communicate with you all. If you're interested in what we do, you can email me or you can email anybody here, Dan, Tim, Merrill, Alex, or Don at revereasset.com. So let's get into the charts, folks. We're going to start with the S&P here. And as you can see, a nasty gap down, but we did make a higher low for the time being, right? We didn't undercut this 449 roughly low there on the S&P or on SPY. And we finished at the top of the range here on the S&P. So we are below the 50. We are below the 21. But the positive is we stayed above this 450 level. It's very key. And we actually closed back above this 454 level, also very key, this previous pivot. So now what I would be looking for would be a possible fill gap scenario where maybe the S&P can creep back up here and fill the gap. You're also most likely going to see the 21 and the 50 converge on the S&P and the Qs here in the next couple of days, depending on the price action. You can see the 21 and the 8 starting to curl there, the 50 still curling up. So just something to be mindful of there. QQQ did get back above 380 at the end of the day. Pretty impressive. Once again, back below the 50, just like the S&P. Conversely, making a lower low, undercutting that 378.90 low, but finishing at the top of the range. And then we've got the same thing pretty much happening here with the 50 and the 21, right? 21 rolling over, 50 still sloping upwards. Those are probably going to cross here in the next couple of days, like I said. The Dow, right on the 200-day, same story, finishing in the top half of the range, bouncing off of that area. Very important. We talked about this last week, that it was acting pretty well, pretty steady, Well, all of a sudden that changed on the 16th, right? So we have a nasty reversal kinda, and then a gap down, then another gap down. So it's another thing to be mindful of as we're going through here. We are having 3 days of selling, pretty extensive selling, particularly on the indices. So be mindful of that just in regards to where we're at right now. This is a pretty sharp move down on an ATR or a relative volatility basis for the Dow and for the S&P. Small caps, as I mentioned, still struggling to find their footing, making another new low, but again, finishing near the top of the range. Oils and banks, financials really couldn't get it together today very much. And then lastly, mid caps, I mentioned getting back below the 200-day, undercutting the previous low of 485.71, but finishing at the top of the range. So the positive you take away from today is we finished well on the indices as well as on a lot of stocks. And we didn't continue to flush lower, even though it certainly felt like and looked like we should have or could have. So that's the positive to take away from today, in my opinion. Another interesting little caveat about today is even when things were kind of at their worst, we were not seeing TLT green today. So something that I kind of noticed early this morning accelerated a little bit as the day went on and stocks came back, but TLT down a little bit today, as well as the dollar down just a smidgen today, even though that still looks like a perfectly normal uptrend as well. So just to highlight those two things, because we have been tracking those things. So let's go through some of the stuff that was green and looked good, and I'm going to do this pretty quickly here. So this is with complete disregard to what sector, whatever the case may be. I'm just looking for relative strength and what was holding up well or green on a day where the markets were otherwise really bad, right? So let's go through this here. AMBA, a name we recently got stopped out on, nonetheless up 2.5% today while the markets were down. I don't like necessarily the fact that it had that really ugly candle, but I can't argue the action here. It's holding up, showing relative strength versus the market here. AVGO, Broadcom, similar action as in regards to price performance today, up around 2%, slightly under. Beautiful action respecting the 8-day. Broadcom continues to act like a leader. Really strong move here over the last couple of months from Broadcom. Snow was actually green today. This is what I mean by, well, I say that it finished slightly down, but some of these high beta names were showing some relative strength. You can see Snow basically flat, but holding up a lot better than the S&P, than the Qs. So some of these names in these high beta areas that have been decimated, Snow's been one of the ones that held up better, showing some strength today. Names like APP, AppLovin. Once again, it did finish down, but outperforming the indices. What I'm looking for on these names is a RS line that's hooking up over the last 2 or 3 days. And similarly, that is what you see on ARKK. Now, this is an ugly chart, it's beat up, but you see a sharp move up in this RS line. And we know that G5 stocks have been showing some relative strength over the last few days. And you might say, well, Hunter, how do you know that? Well, right before the Fed announcement, ARKK was at 92, QQQQ was at 386, I believe, and SPY was at 463. Obviously, the Qs and the S&P are below those levels, but ARKK is not. So we're seeing some signs of life in the high beta space that really has been decimated. As you can see, Kathy Wood down almost 50% on the year at the lows here with ARKK. Some other names that held up pretty well today. Home Depot continues to act all right. It actually was a bounce off the 50, but when the S&P and the Qs and the Dow are below the 50 and the stock is not, I want to take notice of that. And I saw the bounce today at this area. So HD bouncing off the 50. We also have NEWR, New Relic, a recent gap up, but showing some relative strength today, up about 2%. Even the Bitcoin ETF up around 2%, showing some relative strength versus the market, kind of further evidence there of some of those high beta areas showing some signs of life. Netflix was the shining star of the FANG stocks today, slightly green, but not a great looking chart, but nonetheless green today while the market was not. Pfizer, PFE has been on a really, really monstrous run the last couple of weeks, couple of months really. Continuing that today, up another 2.5%. Procter and Gamble, a defensive name that has had a really, really strong breakout, holding up at the 8-day today, green. And then AMT and Cube, two in the real estate / REIT space at reasonable levels here, finishing off at the top of their range, finishing better than the market. And then Cube actually finishing slightly green with an RS line blue dot there. So there's the good. Let's look at the bad. XLE, the energy ETF, undercutting the 200 but getting back above it. XLF, very similar story, undercutting the 200, getting back above it. So financials and oils, although they finished or started very poorly, finished okay. I mentioned Home Depot already. Tesla really still struggling to get anything going, but right at this 900 level, this is a really important spot for Tesla to try and find some type of support and start moving back the other direction here. Nvidia, it did get under the 50 here. I'm trying to see. 267 is the high. I think it didn't quite fill the gap to right here. It's about $4 below the low of today. But Nvidia, another big name, finishing near the top of the range, but still not the strongest today, right? Nvidia, although it was only down a little bit, this was one of the ugliest names in the beginning of the day. Tesla, same story. Facebook down about 2% or so today, 3% below all those key moving averages. TAN, the solar ETF, maybe getting impacted by some of the political news over the weekend, down about 7%. Rivian and Lucid, these new EV makers, continue to take it on the chin, maybe having some valuation reset / multiple compression, even though they don't have earnings. But some of these coming back to earth is probably the best way to say it. Lucid trying to hold up, recently added to the NASDAQ. And then last couple here, Ford, not quite able to stay above the 21. You do have that 50 not very long, or not very far below it, but Ford looked like it was about to really break out and then ultimately didn't last week. So just all the way back into that consolidation. 50 days not too far. That's something I would watch for, as a possible touch of the 50 here on Ford. So that's going to wrap up the video for today, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on Thursday's video, as well as the podcast. Actually, there is no podcast this week because it's Christmas, but I will see you on Thursday's video, which will be the last one of the week. So I hope you all have a great week and enjoy the holidays.